Hello, everyone. It's been a couple of weeks since I did a video. I had hoped to do, um, some every week, and I did have material this last week that I could have made a video on showing some stamp sorts, but I was just so pressed for time that I really just didn't get a chance. But an idea hit me this last week that I thought would be good to cover. Uh, in a fairly quick video, and that is the confusing terminology or the confusing use of terms type, die, and varieties in stamp catalogs. These three terms, in my mind, have very specific meanings, but in Scott particularly, they tend to use these terms almost interchangeably and in various listings in the catalog. So, for instance, the word type has been used. I've seen it used in Scott to describe the differences in design on the early 1851 to 57 and 1860 Topan Carpenter issues with the different plate characteristics, like the 1 cent Franklin, 10-cent Washington, and so forth. But then working on Austria this week, when I was dealing with the Imperial Crown issues from the 19 teens, there were the high Kroner values on colored paper. The type differences, types 1 and type 2, were really just dimensional differences in the design size that, as best I can determine, are simply wet versus dry printings. Much like the Admiral issues of Canada. I mean, wet and dry printing, or the transition from wet printing to dry printing, was a fairly common thing in the mid-teens of the 20th century, I should say. Canada made the switch between 1924 and 25, but some other countries did that around, a little bit earlier or a little later. So that's an example of confusing use of the word type. You'll see in British Commonwealth, they'll use dies, die A and die B, or die 1 and die 2. But then other countries will use types, type 1 and type 2, in much the same way as dies. Likewise, varieties. You'll see the word variety used a lot by stamp collectors. But there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason as to when that term will be used. So, I want to clear up a little bit, in my mind, give you some definitions that I think make sense to be applied to all stamps, and really the catalog should be rewritten with these definitions to make them consistent, in my opinion anyway. So here goes. So a type difference on a stamp, in my mind, is a design detail that differs from the normal design, and it's present on more than one stamp in the sheet, but not all stamps in the sheet. And it maybe is, say, all the stamps from a particular row, or it could be every second column, or it could be a couple of positions on a sheet. So on this definition, if we look at Canadian stamps, the ones that jump out in my mind that would be type differences would be things like the closed frameline variety on the 2-cent New Brunswick issue from 1934. That occurs on the right-hand column of the sheet. The broken door frame variety on the 1972 Cornelius Krieghoff stamp, where again, if I remember correctly, it was every second column on the sheet of 50, I think. Or maybe it was the last two columns, I'm not sure. But there are several varieties in Canada. They're listed as varieties, but really they're types because they affect a large number of stamps in the sheet, and the positions of those differences are the same on all the sheets. So in my mind, Scott uses the term correctly on the US stamps because all the type differences that they're listing are actual positions on the sheet. And many of the types all come from the same sheet. Or maybe from a few sheets. So that's, in my opinion, the way the term type should be used. Okay, as opposed to dies, okay, die type difference, die 1, die 2, die A, die B, that refers to the actual die that's used to lay down the plate. So, like a type difference, a die difference will be a design detail or a few design details that differ ever so slightly. But unlike a type, which only affects a certain number of stamps on a sheet and not all the stamps, a die difference will be every stamp on the sheet because the same die is used to lay down the entire plate. So it's similar in terms of appearance, but the difference between a die and a type difference simply has to do with whether or not it applies to the whole sheet and every position, in my opinion. So Canada uses the term correctly, and as far as I know, it's most of the countries list it correctly, but there are some countries, I believe, where they use the term type to refer to different dies. And it just seems to depend on each country and how their listings, philatelic listings over the years have been written. So that's the die. Now, a variety is any design difference or anomaly with a stamp that is not, it's not a type difference and it's not a die difference. Now, that can be, you can get varieties generally fall into two classes. Those that are one-offs, so freaks, things that occur only once. They don't necessarily occur on every sheet, and they may occur on only one sheet. They may be unique. Versus constant or tertiary varieties that occur periodically throughout the printing run. So quite often you'll see a catalog refer to a constant variety. And what a constant variety is typically is a variety that always occurs in the same position or few positions in each and every sheet that's printed. And it will always be in the same place. And that's what most of the catalogs list. In fact, most of them have policies that they won't list a variety unless it's constant. However, there are varieties that are periodic in that they occur in the same position on affected sheets, but they don't occur on every single sheet in the print run. That's very common with Canada, where you have a variety that occurs on every second sheet or every 3 sheets or every 6 sheets. The Krieghoff issue that I referred to earlier was printed in 6 panes. Each print sort of setup would be 6 panes of 50. And there are several really good varieties that only occur on one of the 6 panes, whereas several of the other constant varieties will occur on every pane. Um, so the tertiary varieties, that's what they're called, are those types. They occur not on every sheet in the print run, and those are generally the most valuable because they're the scarcest. A lot of times, I mean, Unitrade lists a lot more of these varieties than other catalogs do. But by and large, on most issues, they don't list them because they're not on every single sheet. Now, how does one prove that a variety is constant? That's difficult because, I mean, it's easy if you have a series of sheets and every single sheet you examine has the same variety in the same place. But if, let's say, you have 2 or 3 sheets, just having a variety on the same place on all 3 sheets does not by itself prove that it's constant. It's entirely possible that what you have is a tertiary variety, and you just happen to have 3 sheets of that variety. Although, if you have, 3 sheets and they're the same, the likelihood is much lower. But it's difficult. It's difficult to prove that absolutely 100% that a variety is constant, unless you have a very large number of sheets or blocks and it's always in the same position. What you're generally looking to do is to find one sheet or one block that doesn't have the variety, which will prove that it's tertiary as opposed to being constant. Now, proving that a variety is tertiary is fairly easy. If you let's say you have 2 or 3 sheets or 2 or 3 blocks of 4 or something like that, where you've got the same variety in the same position on all 3, or even on just 2 of the 3, then that you've got proof right there. As long as you have at least one other occurrence and it's identical, well, then it's tertiary. And it may be very infrequent, but it at least exists in more than one occurrence. So that's the way I see those terms. So just a quick video to try and clear a little bit of confusion up on that terminology. Hopefully I'll have something for you guys next week. Next week I've got to look at my schedule again. I was going to tackle South America, but I think it's going to be too time consuming for what I need to do, for the amount of time I have. So I may do either Switzerland or British Europe. It'll be one of those two. And I'll be able to probably tease out some lessons from what's being worked on then. Okay, talk to you later. Bye for now.